Now, there's one last story I wanted to cover today. And I'm sure we've all seen on the news, Extinction Rebellion were out protesting. There was a Just Stop Oil protest that I covered a few days ago. The environmental disasters that are coming, and we can't avoid them now, essentially, or it's very difficult for us to avoid them. These are now back in the headlines, and the protest and pressure groups are back stealing the headlines through some rounds of protest, right? What's good is this time round, Extinction Rebellion protested the right thing, right? Instead of messing up people's daily lives, for example. They were protesting. They occupied Tufton Street. If people don't know what Tufton Street is, basically there's a couple of addresses on Tufton Street that are home to essentially the worst people in the country. I've described them as the enemy of the people on multiple occasions. That's basically what they are. So this is all think tanks and anti climate action pressure groups, Taxpayers Alliance, LGB Alliance, Save Our Statues, CapEx, the Centre for Policy Studies, Policy Exchange, the Institute of Economic Affairs. Basically, every single person in the country who makes their money from being funded to do propaganda for the richest people in the world. They all live and occupy Tufton Street, 55 and 57, the vast majority of the time. And because so many of the organisations that are funded by these rich people on Tufton Street are those who either directly undermine the fight against climate change or implicitly undermine the fight against climate change, like people like Policy Exchange, basically the economics think tanks like the CPS, Policy Exchange, and the IEA, for example. They kind of do soft climate denial. They'll get positions on GB News, or they'll be invited on Politics Live or on LBC's Cross Question to politely question the steps we're taking to mitigate climate change. And there are other groups there that will just deliberately outwardly deny climate change, or will be there to always push back against any climate policy through lobbying, for example. And these are very dangerous people. The IEA are basically responsible for the entirety of the Trussonomics budget that crashed the economy, their supply side reforms that were stupid and should never have been done. Policy Exchange have been really on the transphobia grift. They've published multiple studies, one with a foreword from Labour MP Rosie Duffield, of all people, trying to justify through shop statistics about transphobic policy being passed by the Conservative Party and Rosie Duffield. And so they're awful as well. Also, institutionally Islamophobic, Policy Exchange have deliberately tried to make hack studies to try and give tacit support to Islamophobic things as well. So basically, the worst people in the country inhabit this particular part of the country. And it was good that Extinction Rebellion and people like that, who usually get on people's nerves for interrupting their own daily lives through street protests, blocking whole roads, for example, stop people from getting to work, which makes you no friends but does give you publicity, right? Bit of a double-edged sword. And fundamentally, I agree with these protests. If you don't get noticed, you don't get coverage. And if you don't get coverage, your point never gets across, for example. So yeah, and I have some criticisms of XR and the things that they've done, but this is a really good protest for them to do. But unfortunately for the what's the word I'm even looking for? Co-founder, that's the word I'm looking for. Unfortunately for the co-founder of Extinction Rebellion, she's been caught, right? She has been caught red-handed participating in society while simultaneously asking for us to change society. Let's have a look. Hypocrite Extinction Rebellion co-founder buys plastic packaged fruit that's been flown thousands of miles to a local Waitrose from around the world before taking it all home in her diesel car. Which is, again, absolutely... I cannot believe that she would also, whilst criticising society, simultaneously participate in society. What a fucking charlatan, right? How dare you? How dare you participate in society? Gail Bradbrook racked up more than 17,000 air miles in her shopping trolley. Her Waitrose shop included Chilean grapes from more than 7,000 miles away. She drove to the supermarket in Stroud, Gloucestershire, in a diesel 1.5 litre car. What? I can't believe this. And this is basically the limit of conservative argumentation at this point, right? You criticise dirty air, yet you breathe it. Curious indeed, Ling Ling. Right? This is basically the peak, right? The absolute zenith of conservative argumentation, where they will vaguely gesture at some kind of imagined hypocrisy, because that's more important to them than the actual things that are being talked about, or, for example, the utility of what's being proposed, because they have a completely different moral philosophy. But again, it's not surprising that they would not only try to paint this as somehow hypocritical, but not actually engage with any of the points that's originally being made by Extinction Rebellion in general, because they don't care about Extinction Rebellion, they don't care about the climate crisis. All they care about is trying to manufacture consent against people who also want to fight against the climate crisis to be able to protect their bottom line. Right, that's it. Right? No one is doing the opposite, giving the oil barons criticism while they take out their food recycling on a weekly basis. I mean, yeah, literally. Anyway, the co-founder of Extinction Rebellion was branded a towering hypocrite today after she was caught at the supermarket buying imported food flown in from around the world and packing in non-recyclable plastic before driving home in her diesel car. I'd also like to point out before we move on, this was by Martin Robertson, the chief reporter for Mail Online. This was such a huge story that required massive amounts of coverage that they literally got their chief reporter to report on this stuff. Clearly an issue that is the integral to the public discourse right now, that it required the senior journalist for the Daily Mail, which obviously is a kind of a contradiction in terms, but whatever, right? That needed to properly expose this charlatan who did the terrible thing that was engaging in society. The eco-protest group begins 4 days of protests across London on Friday. Miss Bradwick was spotted stocking up food that racked up more than 70,000 air miles before being stocked at a Waitrose in Gloucestershire. Now, what's interesting is that they're going to be kind of framing this, the fact that she's a Waitrose shopper makes her middle class, which she is the middle class. If you shop at Waitrose, you are certainly middle class. But I think it's good. I think it's good that middle class people shop at Waitrose. If they have the money to spaff away on things that are needlessly expensive, then good. Waitrose have a employee dividend. It's technically a sort of semi-cooperative. But it's better that if they have enough money, expendable income to spend at Waitrose, by all means spend it, right? If you can't afford to shop at it, I'm not going to castigate people for going to the massively exploitative Lidl or whatever it might be, right? But if you can spend money shopping more ethically, fine, good, great, happy for you to do it. The dividends getting paid out to the workers, that's fine. Not a problem. But the kind of people who do shop at Waitrose are usually incredibly tedious. So, there's some give and take with this one. Bradwick was pictured grabbing Vietnamese tea, Chilean grapes, an item from Spain, Cyprus, and Italy. Yes, flown in so far as Spain. Yeah, you cannot protest the climate whilst buying Spanish food anymore. Not the European countries, even they are completely out of any kind of justification for buying if you believe in tackling the climate crisis, for example, right? You're only allowed to grow your own carrots, tomatoes, and onions in your backyard and eat them with, I don't know, fucking tripe, I guess. Yeah, you can have carrots, onions, and tripe. Home British grown crappy food. Right? The only thing you're allowed to eat now. Otherwise, you're not allowed to have any criticism of government policy at all. Spain is a whole different continent now. Brexit means Brexit. True. Not only is she a hypocrite for buying food with loads of air miles associated with it, she also clearly hates Britain and wants to thwart Brexit by buying imported foods from a European country. How dare you? Is British food not good enough for Miss Bradbrook and Extinction Rebellion? Clearly not. Clearly they're just more Ramonas trying to eat food that is closer tied with their beloved Brussels European Union. Exactly. I bet Brussels sprouts were flown in as well. As part of its core 3 demands, Extinction Rebellion says every part of society must now act to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Yet her shopping items, which came from 3 different continents, were bound in plastic, nylon, and polythene. Have you considered that your food was contained in packaging, Gail? Yes, absolutely. No, you can have no criticisms of the fact that 70% of emissions are produced by the largest corporations in the world if you have any of your items in any amount of packaging. Hope they just don't import 1/3 of their cheese, because that would be a disgrace. And the worst part is, you're absolutely right, Lincoln Bio. The reason why they know this is because some fucking Daily Mail stalker was following her around to know exactly what she bought, right? Again, it's the curtain twitchers, it's the curtain twitching boomers every fucking time. Yes, Greta Thunberg wrote a book and killed trees, right? When she could easily have made the book out of the concrete that she could theoretically have grown. And I've known plenty of concrete books that have worked really well. We get some pork market emotes in chat, please. They'll be criticising them for not eating expired food next. You must eat expiring food, otherwise you're letting things go to waste. Very true, Donny Marco. Very, very true. An onlooker said, buying fruit flown halfway around the world is non-recyclable packaging, then driving home in a diesel motor. What a towering hypocrite. Thing is, what's interesting, right? She's got like a Citroen C3 Picasso. Earlier, at one point in this article, they describe it as being a gas guzzling diesel car. I'm like, what? First of all, right? There is conflicting discussion over whether a diesel is more environmentally friendly than a petrol car is. Like, a diesel cars are technically more efficient, even though they produce more different dangerous gases, although some of them are dangerous to humans rather than the environment. But they get longer range, and the Citroen C3 Picasso that is pictured here that she's driving. I checked up on this, right? I did my fucking research for this segment. Turns out actually that the diesel one is like 40 miles per gallon better than the petrol version is. She's at least being more efficient as far as miles per gallon goes, even if more nitrous dioxide is being released by the exhaust pipe. And even then, the more recent cars that have been released, especially diesel ones, have better kind of particulate filtration systems. So a lot of the time, diesel cars are actually better for the environment than petrol cars. And if you're going to buy a car, you might, it's not, a Citroen people carrier, where you're getting your max amount of people transported for the lowest amount of emissions, is what you're going to have to want to go with, right? And Citroen may have previously been bad with hitting their emissions targets, but the newer models of these have all been released with their like hyper, environmentally friendly and efficient engines recently too. So I think what makes some petrol more environmentally friendly is that they will use like bioethanol mixed in with petrol to make it the source of it more environmentally friendly as well. It's a difficult conversation, but this idea that specifically the diesel that she's driving is therefore means that she's somehow more hypocritical than if she drove there in a petrol car or took the bus, for example. Like, come on, it's such a ridiculous point to make. It's such really genuinely grasping at straws here, grasping at paper straws, obviously, not plastic straws, right? The Daily Mail would never grasp at plastic straws, considering how clearly that they hate climate hypocrisy. They would never be seen dead with plastic straws, let alone grasping at them at all, right? Grasping only at paper straws in this house, clearly, lest we be judged for participating at least somewhat in society, right? She was doing everything Extinction Rebellion tells us not to do, the onlooker told The Sun, but at least she wasn't held up on her way home by idiots who glued themselves to the road. What's interesting as well is they just seem to kind of forget that the whole main point of the protest movement is not about anyone's individual actions. The amount of damage that's been done by British Petroleum, who were the people who popularised and invented the phrase, they hired a fucking ad agency, like a massive ad agency, to popularise the term personal carbon footprint, specifically so that they could take people's ire away from the structural damage that was being done by the petrochemical industry and by big multinational corporations, for example, and try to put it upon individuals to be an individualized problem, because we're all atomized under neoliberalism. There can never be any structural critiques. And that was deliberately done and paid for by British Petroleum specifically, so that ire could be taken away from them and focus more towards individual actions of members of society, which is what the Daily Mail care about. But Extinction Rebellion, the reason why the pressure groups exist is specifically because they want to engender political will in the political class who make the decisions, right? No one's changing their individual actions because they've been held up on the motorway. But getting the public platform to be able to criticise government policy, that's where the change is coming from. That's where the actual problem with is trying to be solved by these groups like Extinction Rebellion and Insulate Britain, for example, are coming from. In fact, when they talk about gluing themselves to roads, that wasn't Extinction Rebellion. That was Insulate Britain. And their singular policy that they were pushing for could only be done by the government, right? It can only be done through a wide-scale insulation drive, which is what Insulate Britain were asking for in the first place, right? They were not trying to inconvenience members of the public to try and get random members of the public to pay for their own insulation. They wanted a government policy to be specific to retrofit homes to be more insulated. That was the whole point of the Insulate Britain protests. These are structural problems that require structural solutions. And making these things about whether or not you eat things with certain plastic wrapping, which I don't agree that you shouldn't do that, right? I agree that you should try and minimize plastic packaging. You should minimize the amount of time you use your car. You should try and source food that is far more local rather than was travels around the world, for example. But she doesn't control how the suppliers gets their grapes. If she wants grapes, she's going to buy grapes, and most people are going to act in that way. But if you don't have wide-scale structural change in how companies like Waitrose, for example, source their food, or the ways in which the government engages in climate policy, you're never going to get fucking anywhere, because people's individual behaviour is always part of the base and superstructure, rather than individualised in the way that the Daily Mail seems to think it should be. Right? Insulate Britain with homegrown concrete. True. A fifth of all food-related greenhouse gas emissions comes from the transporting edible products across the planet. These are even higher for fruit and vegetables that are out of season, and they need to be refrigerated as they are brought over. And again, I think that is a reasonable point of criticism, but that doesn't take away from their entire message, which is the whole point of the article. The article isn't there to try and get her to not do these things. It's trying to undermine the entire point of Extinction Rebellion, which is about structural change rather than about individualized actions. But I digress. Just Stop Oil. She caused £27,500 of damage to the Department for Transport building when she smashed a bulletproof window with a chisel and hammer. Based, we stand. She's the director of the company called Compassionate Revolution, which had an unrestricted income of £1.5 million in the year ending June the 30th, 2022. It was incorporated in 2015 and had total unrestricted expenditure of £1.3 million in that time. She caused anger in 2021 when after neighbours moaned about her eyesore house and overgrown garden. What's going on here? What's going on here? Until we fix cargo ships, concrete, and air travel, plastic wrapping is so utterly inconsequential. No. Yeah, it's only inconsequential if you believe that there is nothing to be gained in criticising people for participating in society, Begal. Right? Should have made the window hammer-proof. True. Apparently she has a house. Look, she just got plants in front of her house. She just has. This is just plants. Fucking homeowners associations, man. Fucking hate them. I think this is cute. I like plants. Plants look nice. It's better than fucking lawn. The same year, she was branded a hypocrite after admitting to driving a diesel car, saying she could not afford an electric vehicle. As someone pointed out in chat, apparently she couldn't, it was more likely if she was driving a Citroen C3 diesel, it would be because she couldn't afford an electric vehicle. It's almost like, right? It's almost right, guys. It's almost right. It's almost as if asking a bunch of working class people to be able to afford expensive electric cars is not the real solution, when you could redesign cities and transport to be more environmentally friendly and cheaper, or indeed you could do it free at the point of use with universal basic services, so that people wouldn't even need to buy their own cars. Crazy idea, I know, but maybe the entirety of our conversation about the climate crisis could be expanded anywhere outside of people's individual decisions. But